Please turn to page 58 for personal narrative writing at stage 5. Pages 58, 59, 60, and 61 are the pages that you'll use for this stage of writing. On page 58 will be our chant. Always use the chant to introduce to students exactly what they will be learning in each stage. So when I begin stage 5, I will begin with my narrative writing chant. On the next page, on page 59, what you'll notice is your steps that you will, as the teacher, be able to follow. This is your teacher page, and you will have all of your steps here for you to teach the lesson. It's an at-a-glance page for you to use so that you're not flipping through all of the different directions on different pages. It makes it easier. On page 60 is listed out in detail all of the different skills students will be learning when it comes to content and organization, sentences, and mechanics at this specific stage. This is a checklist for you to use so when they write, you can see that they are covering all of these different skills. Also shown on this page is the chart that you can download. Remember, it's an 8.5 by 14 chart that you can download to display to students so that they can follow the steps in the lesson. And then finally, at this stage, is a sample organizer and student writing. Let's go back to page 58 so that we can begin the lesson. Now let's visualize the classroom. You will have on page 58 this chant displayed either up on the board or underneath a document viewer so students can see all the words. You will provide each student with a blank piece of paper. What I suggest is that you give them the legal size paper. Tri-fold this ahead of time. Take a large stack of papers, bend them, and tri-fold it so that when you pass out the paper to the students, they already have the 3 boxes on their page. When students are given this page, they will eventually draw lines and label it so that this organizer is ready to go for a stage 5. We'll walk through this entire process together. The students have their blank organizer in front of them, and you are going to introduce the lesson. So let's get started. Boys and girls, we are going to learn how to write a personal narrative. Please ask me what a personal narrative is. What's a personal narrative? Thank you for asking. Let's learn our personal narrative chant so we know what all the parts of the story are when we're writing. A personal narrative is a true story about myself that's memorable. It has a beginning, middle, end. In the beginning is a story opening, SC arrow. In the middle are actions, actions, actions where I do, say, and think. The end. Tell what happened to you at the end. And then don't forget, have a reflection. The reflection is when I look back at what happened to me and I'm going to share what I felt or what I thought or what I wish after this experience happened to me. See if you can go back and say the chant on your own. On page 61, what you will see at the top is a finished organizer of what this particular stage will look like. The reason why I'm having you jump to a finished organizer right now is because I want to show you that on this organizer, this ends up becoming 1 paragraph. But we're going to write this same exact story when we go through a lesson together and have more sentences in the beginning, middle, and end, which will make this actually a 3-paragraph story. It's critical that at stage 5, you could either have a 1 or 3-paragraph story. This way, when you're working with students, you could have some students that are just writing a 1-paragraph story, still at a stage 5, but others that are expanding and adding more sentences to each part, and then they would end up with a paragraph for the beginning, a paragraph for the middle, and a paragraph for the end. It's a wonderful way to take this organizer and either have it as a basic story or expand with longer parts. In our activity that we'll do today, we will actually write a 3-paragraph story. In your example in the book, it's a 1-paragraph story. Let's get started. Now that you've introduced a personal narrative to your students, they will have their blank piece of paper and you will start following the steps. Again, you have the steps displayed for you on page 59 that you will follow, and the students have a blank piece of paper. You should have a blank piece of paper just like this underneath the document viewer, so together the students and you walk through the steps in order to write a personal narrative. Once the students have learned all the steps of writing a personal narrative, then you will have them write their own personal narratives, and you could have them do that as table groups and mixed ability groups, as partners, or on their own. Now, before we start, you may ask yourself, how can everyone write the same story if it's a personal narrative? I just tell the students, boys and girls, we're going to write the same story so we can learn the steps. Put your hands together and go like this. Go. Once I learn the steps, I can write my own story. That's right. So what are we really learning today? The steps. How to put together our organizer so we can eventually write our own story. And if we all have different stories, it's too difficult to learn the steps. So we're going to use the same story and follow the steps. Let's get started. We have a blank piece of paper in front of us, and we are going to follow the steps in order to write a personal narrative. So the first step, and if you notice, I have a narrative writing stage 5 poster up here, or again, you could have the smaller downloadable poster for students to view. And we're going to look at the first step, which says, tell the story. Because a personal narrative is a true story, when you're writing one, the first thing you do is just tell the story. So I'm going to tell the students, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened to me. And we're going to use that story. This is a time when something happened to me when I was your age. So I always use something and tell the kids that this is when I was around 2nd or 3rd grade. This is a story that happened to me when I was 8 years old. What happened was, it was a Saturday night, and I was so excited. This is why the story is so great, because I was going to have my first sleepover. And I grabbed my sleeping bag. I was ready to run out the door. I yelled to my mom and dad, I'm leaving, I'm going. I have all my gear ready to run over to my friend's house. And my friend just lived down the block, so I was able to walk there on my own. So I grab all my gear. I yell, bye! I might stay up all night because it's a slumber party. I can't wait. And I start running down the street. I get to my friend's house. I knock on the door. And no one answers. I don't even hear anything. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. Then I knock on the door again. And my friend's mom answers the door. And I'm saying to her, hi, I'm here for the party. And she looked at me and said, the party? That's not tonight. That's next Saturday. Oh my goodness. I was so embarrassed. I put my head down. I turned back around and I slowly walked home. And when I was walking home, crocodile tears started coming down my face. I was so upset. I couldn't believe that I went there on the wrong night. It was so embarrassing. When I got home, I told my mom and dad, and they felt really bad because I was so embarrassed. But you're not going to believe what happened. I'm now going to show you how this sad story turned into a happy story. My dad decided that he and I were going to have our own slumber party. The two of us went in the backyard. We put up a tent, put our sleeping bags in there, and we ended up having a camp out all night long. After that night, I knew, boy, I'm the luckiest kid in the world. I sure have a great dad. There's my story. So I told the story. Now, let me give you a little trick. After you tell a story, then tell the kids, silent movie time. Let's just act out what happened in the story. And what happens is when you have the kids act it out and not say a word, it helps them frame each part. So now I'm going to go to the beginning of my story. Let's start. Ready? Now let's go to the middle of the story. Now let's go to the end of the story. So we acted out the story and it broke it up into little frames. It helps students not only to tell the story, but to act it out so it goes into frames. Now they can actually see each one of those frames, which many times ends up becoming a sentence or a couple of sentences. So fabulous activity. When they go back to plan out their story, they can almost feel it like, oh yeah, that's right, this is what happened next, and then they can put it into their planner. We told our story, we acted it out. Now we need to get organized. So step 1, tell the story. We did our silent movie. Step 2, get organized. What does every story have? Beginning, middle, end. So we're going to go over to our paper. You're going to touch the folds on your paper. That's critical. Make sure the students first just touch where you folded it. Because sometimes when I say make a line down each fold, sometimes the kids don't know what that means, and then they just start putting lines everywhere. Have them touch each fold, then say, okay, now draw a line down each one of those folds. And what do we have, boys and girls? We have our beginning, we have our middle, and we have our ending box. The next thing we need to do is we need to label the beginning. And in the beginning, we're going to have S, C, arrow. I also want to show you we're going to have 2 lines because this is the beginning of the story, and in this beginning we're going to have a sequence where we're going to have our setting, character, and action to start our story opening, and then we want to have a couple of actions where we're going to have dialogue or thoughts. Then we'll have our middle. We're going to keep that blank until we need to list it out. And then finally, at the end, I'm going to draw a line here for our ending box. I don't know how many actions or reactions we'll have here, but we'll have at least one sentence there for the ending. And then we'll have a TCR. So this is what we do to make our organizer for our personal narrative at a stage 5. We have our 3 boxes, SC arrow. We'll have a couple of sequence actions or dialogue or thoughts in the beginning. We'll put our actions and reactions in the middle, and then we'll have our endings also. So again, they have to know beginning, middle, and end and how to sequence in each part. Let's now go and fill in our organizer. You will see the next step says character. We're going to go to the C and we're going to say C, character. Who's the character in the story? I am. So I need to write the word I. The next step is going to be setting. And when did this happen? Well, let's put a moon last Saturday night. Where did this happen? Well, I was in my house. So now we have last Saturday night at my house, I, and then the arrow is action. What did I do at the beginning of the story? So now if the students forget, we just go back and act it out. So it was last Saturday night at my house, what was I doing? So I was grabbing my sleeping bag and my gear. Where? To go to a sleepover or a party, a sleepover party. Last Saturday night at my house, action. What was I doing? Let's act out the beginning of the story. Grab my sleeping bag and gear to go to a party. Once I acted it out and I said this part, then I may make a little sleeping bag here. So there's my little sleeping bag. And then I'm going to show that I went to a party. Maybe I'll just write the word party. Let's go back and let's review our sentence. Let's act it out. Let's say it the way that you're going to write it. Put a moon up. Last Saturday night at my house, I grabbed my sleeping bag and gear, then headed to my friend's house for a sleepover party. Notice I have a few icons, a few words, but my language is making the entire sentence go together. You say this sentence over and over and over again, and you don't have to say it exactly the same way. As a matter of fact, every time you go back, you may want to say it a little differently so that you revise it and make it even better. I have my SC arrow. We've orally rehearsed the sentence, but notice I'm not filling in 2 actions below that. We will come back and expand on this beginning of the story after we do the rest of the planning. So let's jump now to the next step. And the next step is step 6, the ending. When students are planning a beginning, middle, end, what happens is, as they plan the beginning and go to the middle, they tend to get confused and they lose their ability to sequence the story. So I have a little trick. We started our beginning. We know I grabbed my gear. I'm ready to go to my friend's house. Now we're going to jump to the ending box. And we're going to say what happened at the end of the story. What was I doing at the end of the story? Oh, I was having a camp out with my dad. I'm going to draw a tent. And I'll put 2 little heads in there so that you can see we were in the tent having our camp out. I'm not going to say that sentence. I'm just going to draw a picture of what happened. This line right here will be the beginning word or a transition phrase to begin this sentence. But I can't say this sentence now until I have all the other sentences developed in the story. I'm just putting that picture there so that we know that's the end. And when I go to sequence the middle, I know that, okay, in the beginning I was getting my gear. At the end, I was in a tent having a camp out in my backyard with my dad. After identifying the beginning and the end, what do we do next? We say, what happened in the middle? How do we go from my getting gear at the beginning to camping out with my dad in the backyard? What happened in the middle to get me to the camp out? We have the beginning labeled, we have the end labeled, so that we can sequence the middle actions, because once you know your beginning and you know where you're heading in your end, then the actions are easier for you to sequence. I grab my gear in the beginning to go to my friend's party. Now jump to the end. At the end, I'm camping out in the backyard with my dad. Let's jump to the middle. What happened in the middle? How did you go from going to a party at your friend's house to camping out with your dad in the backyard? Put up your hand so that we can put a finger up for every single action so we can count how many different sentences. So what happened first? I ran down the street to my friend's house. There's the first. Then I knocked on the door and I had to wait because it took a long time before someone answered. That's the second one. Then my friend's mom opened the door, saw the sleeping bag and said, "Today's not the party, it's next Saturday." That's the third one. Then I was really sad and started to cry as I walked home. There's the fourth action. When I got home, my mother and father felt really bad that I got the day confused. That's the fifth action. My father had an idea. That's the sixth action. Then we jump to the end of the story and we're camping out in the tent. So how many actions happened in the middle? 6. We're going to go to the middle of the story and we're going to write 1. Notice a half line is across this column. We're not making a line all the way. And we're stretching those numbers 1 through 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's very important that we come up with our beginning sentence using SC arrow, draw a picture at the end so we remember that that's our ending action, and then we identify what happened in the middle. Next, we'll go to each one of these numbers and we'll draw a quick picture or write a key word to identify what happened there. At that point, I'm going to say to the students, boys and girls, in these middle actions, we could be doing something, saying something, or thinking something. As we draw a picture or put dialogue or thoughts, we have to think how we're going to put it down. Let's go to the first one. What did we do first? We were running down the street. So let's just draw a picture of me running down the street. And remember, these are stick figures. This is not an art project. So the first thing that happened was I was running down the street to my friend's house. What happened next? I'm knocking on the door when I get to my friend's house. That's going to be not dialogue. That'll be an action. So if it's an action, I draw a picture. So I'm at the door and I'm knocking. So there I am knocking at the door. Let's go to the third action. What happened here? Knocked on the door. My friend's mother opened the door, looked at me, and said, "Today's not the party, it's next Saturday." So how will I put that? Will that be an action or dialogue? I think we need dialogue this time. So we're going to draw a big dialogue bubble. Once we have the dialogue bubble, we will actually put the dialogue in here right at this point. So we'll put quotation marks. What did the mother say? Today's not the party. It's next week. Close quotation marks. This is probably one of the best tricks that I have come up with when it comes to an organizer. And that is to write the dialogue on the organizer with all the punctuation. What I've found is this is a great place to focus on that so that when the students go to write this out, they already have it on their planner. Who said, "Today's not the party, it's next week"? My friend's mom said, comma, "Today's not the party, it's next week." Notice I wrote out that marker. My friend's mom said, comma. We're writing all that out again on the organizer so that when we write out our story, that punctuation, the mechanics are already clear for the students. The next thing that happened was I started to cry. I will draw a picture of tears coming down across my face. This action, I'm walking home and crying. The fifth action in the middle, what happened there? I'm telling my parents that I made a mistake and I don't get to have a party. I don't get to go to a party. So how can I write that on my organizer? Should I have an action or should I have dialogue? I'm thinking dialogue. So I will put a dialogue bubble. And then I need to come up with a way that I would say this. What would be a great way to say this? Today was not the party. I got it wrong. I'm embarrassed. I made a fool out of myself. Today's not the party. Well, the mother said today's not the party. I looked up at my parents and I said, I got the party day wrong. It's next Saturday. I plan many different ways to say the dialogue. Once I like how I said it, then I write down, quotation mark, I got the date of the party wrong. I cried to my parents, I got the date of the party wrong. Remember, we practiced how I would say that over and over and over again until we liked the sentence. Then we went, put our quotation marks, put our capital, put our exclamation point. Next, we need to write who is saying this. I'm saying it. And how did I say it? Did I said or I cried? Ooh, I think we should say I cried. I cried, I got the date of the party wrong. That sounds great. The final action, what happened there after I said that to my parents? My parents looked at each other and came up with an idea. So I'm going to just make that an action where I have my mom and my dad, and I'll put like a little light bulb there, came up with an idea. We drew the picture. Now we have our setting character action at the beginning. We have all the actions, whether it's actions, dialogue, sometimes there may be thoughts. We didn't have that this time. And we have our ending to our story. The next thing that you want to do is see if you can expand the beginning or ending. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and we'll say the beginning of our story. One Saturday night at my house, I grabbed my sleeping bag and gear and headed to my friend's house for a sleepover party. After I practiced that story opening sentence, I'm going to see if I could add a couple more sentences here to expand on my beginning. Could I say what I was thinking, or could I have some dialogue? I think we're going to have dialogue this time because as I grabbed my gear, I was shouting to my parents, I'm going to stay up all night. So we'll put a line here and we'll have our dialogue bubble. What did I say? I'm going to stay up all night. This dialogue is great. I've shouted, I'm going to stay up all night. Who did I shout this to? My parents. So I'll go over here and write, I shouted to my parents. Comma. I'm going to stay up all night. Now we have the beginning of our story. Let's go back and practice it. One Saturday night at my house, I grabbed my sleeping bag and gear to head to my friend's sleepover party. I shouted to my parents, I'm going to stay up all night. Could I have one more sentence here before I run down the street to my friend's house? Maybe my parents could say something back to me. Or I could have a thought, or I could have an action. Maybe we could have an action. What did I do before I left the house? What did my body do to show that I was excited? Maybe my heart started to pound and I jumped up and down, excited to have such a fun weekend. Will show me drawing a picture. I'll draw a picture of me jumping up and down. Maybe I'll show my heart was pounding here. These two sentences that we planned after our SC arrow were after the entire story was planned.